the climate, raising the temperature, increasing the risk of extreme weather. The Republicans just don't accept science. Vote aye on the Markey amendment.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion share, the noes have it. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request the yeas and nays.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
I do ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 112-616, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Mr. Hastings of Florida. Amendment number 2 by Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Amendment number 3 by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio, amendment number 4 by Mr. Welch of Vermont, and an amendment number 5 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. Did you give me 2? The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616, by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote followed by 4 2-minute votes.
All set. The House this afternoon has been debating a bill that would prevent federal agencies from writing or issuing new regulations which would cost more than $100 million for 2 years or until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. They've paused here for votes on 5 amendments to that bill, more amendments to come, and they will finish up work on this tomorrow. They did earlier today pass a couple of bills, including one calling for an audit on the Federal Reserve that was sponsored by Congressman Ron Paul, also a measure replacing President Obama's offshore oil drilling plan, and one that would expand that offshore plan. But here are the amendments to the federal regulations bill. The first one by Alcee Hastings of Florida, an amendment that would exempt regulatory proposals directed at maintaining or enhancing the safety of drinking water. There's a 15-minute vote, and the following 4 amendments will get 2-minute votes. Votes in the Senate today on both a Democratic and Republican tax cut plan, the extension of the tax cuts. The Republican plan fell 45-54. That would have extended for a year all of the Bush tax cuts, the 2001-2003 tax cuts. The Democratic plan passed the Senate rather, 51-48. Their plan, which would extend the tax cuts to individuals making $200,000 or less and couples earning $250,000 or less. That passed just a short while ago in the U.S. Senate. Lots of hearings today on Capitol Hill, including a House hearing with Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, who was there to talk largely about the LIBOR interest rates, the worldwide global interest rates that a number of members talked to him about. We're going to bring you some of that hearing from earlier today as this 15-minute vote continues.
Terry, it's widely reported that you discovered in 2007 that the world's biggest banks were manipulating LIBOR. Your own recommendations made in May of 2008, the following year, indicated your recognition that there was an incentive to misreport. That obviously raises substantial questions about the honesty of the LIBOR submissions and the presence of fraud. When did you alert the U.S. Treasury and the Justice Department of the possibility that LIBOR was being manipulated or rigged, and to whom did you state those concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2008, as the financial crisis intensified and there were broader concerns about the financial strength of banks, European banks were having a tougher time raising dollars, those LIBOR rates began to rise. And there was a lot of concern in the market that the way the rate was structured made it vulnerable to misreporting. Those concerns were widely available in the market, and they were published in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, among other publications. At that time, this is in the spring of 2008, we took a very careful look at these concerns. We thought those concerns were justified, and we took the initiative to bring those concerns to the attention of the broader U.S. regulatory community, including all the agencies that have responsibility for market manipulation and abuse.
And that included Treasury and the Justice Department?
I briefed the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. The members of that group included the CFTC, the SEC, and the Fed.
How about the Justice Department?
Justice is not a member of that committee. And then,
let me ask you, you were aware of the possibility of fraud?
We were absolutely aware, not just of the reports that banks were underreporting and misreporting, but the nature of the rate. Again, this is a rate set in London, overseen by the British Bankers Association, and it's a rate that is an average of, constructed average of estimates.
That's right.
Principally by foreign banks of what they might pay to borrow in 10 currencies at very different maturities.
So
we were aware of
three U.S. banks.
Three at that time, 3 of 16, now 3 of 18.
Sure.
But we were aware of the risk that the way this was designed created not just the incentive for banks to underreport, but gave them the opportunity to underreport,
right.
And that was a problem.
Right. I know that you went to the British regulators. You actually, but what action did you take? You were aware that they took no action, I believe.
Well, let me explain what I did. You know, our first instinct, of course, was not just to brief the broader U.S. regulatory community, including the enforcement agencies, but to bring this to the British. And I personally raised this with the governor of the Bank of England, and then I sent him a very detailed memorandum recommending a series of changes. And then,
yeah, well, let me ask you, and he has denied having any evidence of rigging or of misconduct, but according to what you supplied him, his testimony would not be correct. Is that right?
Well, I felt that we did the important and fully appropriate thing, which is to bring the attention not just to the people in Washington that matter, but to the British of not just the reports and the concerns that were broadly available in the market in the public domain, but also of the range of problems in the way this rate was designed that created that vulnerability. And so we brought those concerns to their attention.
Sure.
And we felt, and I still believe this, that it was really going to be on them to take responsibility for fixing this.
All right, let me ask you this. You reported it to the President's Working Group in May of 2008. What action, if any, was taken at that time to address the concerns that LIBOR was being misreported, there was the existence of fraud and rigging?
What the CFTC did in roughly the same time frame is to initiate a confidential but very far-reaching investigation. Ultimately took 4 years, which resulted in the very, very strong, appropriately strong enforcement response you saw announced earlier this month. Ultimately, that investigation brought in the SEC and the Department of Justice and other agencies.
Sure. Let me ask you this last question. You used LIBOR to set the AIG $182 billion and also the $100 billion TAF. Now we know that those are understated. Does that work to disadvantage of the taxpayer?
We were in the position of investors all around the world. In many cases, you have to choose a rate to decide, use as a reference for what you're lending in that context. And we did what everybody else did, which is to use the best rate available at the time. Now, we are all taking a very, very careful look, and this is a matter of litigation, as you know, not just the ongoing enforcement investigations, about to what extent the rate was moved up or moved down or actually affected in any way. Don't know yet what the results of those discussions will be, and I can't speak to them. But you're right to point out that we, like investors around the world, had to had to take advantage of the rates available at the time, and we chose LIBOR at that point, as did many others.
Thank you. Mr. Frank? All right. Congressman Frank.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly, I just want to get the context, because what's happened here is that some of the leading financial institutions in the world behaved in an outrageous fashion. These were not bad guesses about derivatives. These were not overconfidence about mortgages. This was conscious deception in their own self-interest. And it was done not just by individuals, but by an association that was given powers to self-regulate in some ways. So as I hear some of my colleagues talk about the need for more self-regulation and less prescriptive regulation, LIBOR comes to mind as a very strong refutation. But part of this, and this is troubling to me, and that hasn't happened yet this morning, I hope it doesn't, but in the press and elsewhere, there's been an effort to kind of blame you for all this, because you happen now to be the Secretary of the Treasury in the Obama administration. There is, it seems to me extraordinary. You were an important, but not one of the top officials. I don't mean to denigrate you. The presidency of the Federal Reserve is an important institution. It has been given more importance recently than it's ever had before, as people want to say that you were running the world back then. You had a chairman of the Federal Reserve who was setting the LIBOR, using LIBOR to set the rates. Mr. Bernanke was in charge of AIG. You had Secretary of the Treasury Paulson. We do want to remind people this all happened under the administration of President Bush. And the President's working group to which you reported was the President Bush's working group, with Mr. Cox at the SEC, Mr. Paulson, et cetera. And I stress that because there was a failure to be tough enough with these private sector people who were doing this, but the notion that it was really all the problem of the President of the Federal Reserve of New York is striking. I want to be very clear. You reported this to the President's Working Group on Financial Reform. Who are the members of that group? Who were there in 2008? Give me names.
The Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the Chairman of the CFTC, the Chairman of the SEC, and
Secretary of the Treasury?
And the Secretary of the Treasury.
All right, so we have
Those are the core members of the group. Probably the Chairman of the FDIC, I think, at that stage, or they may be occasionally, but those are the core members.
All right, so these are all Bush appointees, and I think this is a problem not of the regulators, but of the private sector and of the British, because this was a British association. But if people are going to start pointing fingers at regulators, all those people were presidential appointees confirmed by the Senate. You were not a presidential appointee.
No.
So these were 5 or 6 people above you in the organizational chart to whom you reported what you found, and maybe things weren't done tough enough, although I am struck that you note that the CFTC, to its credit, did begin the investigation which culminated in this. So we have a situation where private banks formed in a British association, but with American bank participation, grievously misbehave. You hear about it, reported to the Financial Working Group consisting of Bush appointees, many of whom I value highly and with whom I worked closely in 2008. And some people are dissatisfied that not enough was done. If that's the case, it does seem to me responsibility should be broadly shared. Now, let me ask you this question about too big to fail. The legislation, as you know, says that if a large financial institution cannot pay its debts, it is put out of business, and that no money can be spent by the federal government on the process of putting it out of business. I mean death. I mean, these are the death panels. They weren't for old ladies in the health bill. They were for big banks in the financial reform bill. And the CEO and the other officers are gone. The shareholders are wiped out. The board's dissolved. And that's what the law says. And the law also says that if there is any money that has to be spent to wind it down responsibly, you or your successor is mandated, not authorized, to recover it. Now, what I read is from, for instance, the President of the Federal Reserve of Dallas and his staff, that that's not going to work, because if there was a failure of a large institution, there would be overwhelming pressure on you or your successor to provide federal funds to keep that institution alive. Do you think that's likely?
Unlikely, but I wouldn't have the authority.
It would be breaking the law to do that.
Again, what Congress did is change the law to limit the authority available to the regulators to protect an institution from its mistakes.
And they are then put out of business. By the way, there are some now on the more conservative side who lament that. There was a new book out by Mr. Conrad, who was a managing director, I believe, of Bain. I just got a copy sent to me by the National Review, complaining that we have restricted the ability of the federal regulators to intervene to save an institution too much. But I appreciate your point. If a large institution failed now, you would have no option under the law but to have it fail, and if anything had to be done to put it out of business, you would get the money back from the banks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henselman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I still don't quite understand your answer concerning the Fed's use, the New York Fed's use of LIBOR. On the one hand, I think you have said that, quote, we acted very early in response. We were worried about it. We were concerned about it. But it appears that the early response was to keep using it, which means it appears that you treated it almost as a curiosity or something akin to jaywalking as opposed to highway robbery. I think I just heard you earlier in your testimony say, quote unquote, it was our best choice. There are other interest rate indexes out there. How can a number that you know has been manipulated, how can that possibly be the best choice?
Well, again, we were concerned about this, and we did the important, very consequential thing of bringing it to the attention of the full complement of regulatory authorities that Congress has given responsibility and authority for market manipulation and abuse.
But you weren't obligated to use it. The New York Fed was not obligated to use LIBOR, yes or no?
No, of course not. But we had to make a basic choice among alternatives at that time, and I think that was the right choice back then.
Between a manipulated number and a non-manipulated number.
No, again, I wouldn't say it that way. I would say this was a rate that was structured in a way that was vulnerable to misreporting. We were very concerned about that, and what we decided to do was to try to initiate a reform of the process with the British, but also just to make sure the relevant authorities made use of it.
If I could, Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry, we have a limited amount of time. I'd like to ask another question here. As I review the annual report, I see a lot of discussion of the European debt crisis. Frankly, I see very little discussion of the U.S. debt crisis. We know that on a nominal basis, this country has now racked up more debt in the last 3 years than in the previous 200. We now know that our debt to GDP ratio exceeds our economy. Even in the President's own budget, after the 10-year window, his budget states, quote, the fiscal situation deteriorates badly. The President has previously said that the major driver of our long-term debt is Medicare, Medicaid, our health care spending. Nothing comes close. Yet, and that was in 2009, I have yet to see a reform plan for entitlement spending out of this administration. You testified before the Budget Committee in February of this year in response to Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan. You said that he was, quote, right to say we, meaning the administration, are not coming before you today to say that we have a definite solution to that long-term problem. What we do know is we don't like yours. That was in February. I assume I haven't missed any of the news clips that the administration has come out with a plan. So if the President says this is the major driver, we know that the head of the Federal Reserve has also spoken about our unsustainable spending driven by entitlement spending. I look at this report, I cannot find one mention of the word entitlement, not one mention of the word Medicare, not one mention of the word Medicaid. Again, yet your own budget says, quote, fiscal situation deteriorates badly. How can this not be cited as a major factor that could disrupt U.S. financial stability? And when, if ever, is the administration going to move on this?
Congressman, as you know, the FSOC's Council's job is not to recommend to the Congress long-term reforms to entitlement spending or recommend solutions to our long-term fiscal crisis. We agree, as you said, that our fiscal deficits are unsustainable.
Well, Mr. Secretary, if I could, what is Chapter 3 of this report all about? Annual report recommendations. Does this not impact the competitiveness and stability of U.S. financial markets, our fiscal unsustainability?
We did identify in the report, as I did in my statement in summarizing the report, that these broad long-term fiscal risks are a significant risk to the American economy and ultimately, therefore, to the financial system. And we highlighted that basic risk in the report as was appropriate. But what we didn't
you make other recommendations. You just make no recommendation on what's actually driving, according to the President of the United States, the debt crisis.
I think it would be a strange thing to ask the Fed, the SEC, the CFTC to recommend a detailed medical reform plan, Medicare reform plan. That'd be a strange thing. So you're right to say it's a risk. The Council was right to highlight that risk, but I don't think it's correct to say that the Council should have laid out reform recommendations for restructuring a
Well, I'm out of time, but perhaps next time you could help me with the highlighter because I don't see it.
Thank you, Mr. Henson. Ms. Waters?
Thank you very much. According to Andrew Lowe, a professor at MIT, this LIBOR fixing scandal dwarfs by orders of magnitude any financial scam in the history of markets. That's pretty strong. I'd like you to tell me if you think that statement is true. I would also like to know what impact this manipulation had on our financial markets and what impact is going to have moving forward. And take time to tell us about your series of changes that you recommended. And I'd like to give you time and not take up all the time, so please go ahead.
Okay, let me just say a bit about this broader question, and thank you for giving me the chance to do so. In the detailed recommendations we give to the British, we identified a series of specific things that would make it untenable for this rate to be affected by the bank's incentive to lower their reported cost of funds. We gave them, again, very specific, detailed changes for doing that, and if those had been adopted, more of those have been adopted sooner, you would eliminate this risk going forward. Right now, let me just highlight a few things we think are important given where we are today, because you're going to want to know what's next, what's ahead of us. So let me just walk through that if you just give me a minute. The FSOC, the Council, and the relevant agencies, which means the Fed, the SEC, and the CFTC, are in the process of taking a very careful look at how to address any potential implications of this remaining challenge for the financial system. These bodies are carefully examining other survey-based measures of interest rates and financial prices overseen by private financial firms to assess any potential there for misreporting similar problems. They are carefully examining a broad range of potential reforms and alternatives to LIBOR. There is a global effort led by the Financial Stability Board, which includes all the world's major central banks and market regulators together in a global effort to review potential reforms. We're considering how to deal with the careful and delicate question of how do we make it possible for enforcement agencies that are undertaking a confidential investigation that reveals behavior that could impact the financial system as a whole, how to make it possible for them to share that information with appropriate protections and safeguards with the relevant agencies that have responsibility to the overall functioning of the system. Very important question. We need to take a very careful look at parts of the system where we rely, or where the market relies still, on informal private bodies run by financial firms like the British Bankers Association that have some formal or informal self-regulatory role. Very important question that your colleague referred to earlier. And of course, I think we all need to make sure that these enforcement agencies have the resources they need to do their job. Just think of the specific example. You have a small town with a police department. The population of that town increases by 10, 100 times. You're going to need to increase the size of the police department. It is a necessary, responsible thing to do. And if we do that, you'll have more powerful deterrent, tougher enforcement, and that'll come earlier with broader effects for all of us. Now, in addition to each of those things, of course, we're going to cooperate fully and be fully responsive to the request of this committee for broader information on this. And of course, we'll brief the Congress on the progress of each of those efforts looking at reform and implications and how to reduce the vulnerability of the system in the future to similar problems like this.
Given those recommendations and the problems we've had with the economic meltdown in this country, what else can Congress do to ensure that the interest rates that are being paid between the banks is fair and equitable and somehow will not negatively impact that person who's taken out a mortgage in the United States?
Well, again, I think what you should do is what you're doing, which is you are conducting oversight of these agencies and these efforts, and you should ask for periodic updates from these agencies on the reforms underway to address that risk. That's fully appropriate. We welcome that effort. We'll be fully responsive to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Powell?
I thank you. Excuse me. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Secretary. I have a question about the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. There's an article that said that the Fed briefed the President's Working Group on Financial Markets in June of 2008. And during that time, I assume you were president of the New York Fed in June of 2008?
It was actually in May that we briefed them. And I was the one who did.
Okay. Well, the article said June, but okay, May. It said the Fed briefed the working group. Does that mean you did it or somebody else from the Fed?
It was on the agenda of the meeting, and I went to provide. I wasn't a member of the group, but I occasionally went. I went to provide an update on this issue, and then my staff subsequently briefed officials of the Treasury and separately officials of the SEC and the CFTC.
Okay. You're the chairman of that group right now, correct?
Yes, I'm the chairman of the council.
Okay. In relation to that meeting you had and the meetings you've had since, do you keep detailed minutes of all those meetings?
We do keep minutes of the council meetings today, and we put those minutes in the public direct record.
And they're
with whatever the appropriate lag is to make sure we have, a review by the agency.
All records kept. How often do those meetings lead to policy changes where you make a decision and the Fed goes out and does something or Treasury goes out something or getting involved in the markets at all? How often does that happen?
Well, the council is still in its early stage of implementing the authority the Congress gave it. The Congress gave it two different sets of authorities. One is specific responsibility for things like designating financial market utilities that have systemic implications. That's a specific responsibility the FSOC has, which we've acted on. But it gave it a set of broader coordinating responsibilities in service of something many of you have spoken to, which is try to make sure that you're not leaving large gaps in the system, and the agencies have similar responsibilities are working together, not against each other.
On this vote, the ayes are 188, the nays are 231, less than the majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616. Offered by Mr. Johnson of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
It's the second of 5 amendment votes to a bill dealing with federal regulations, a bill that would prevent federal agencies from issuing new regulations costing more than $100 million for 2 years or until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. This is the second of 5 amendment votes, this one by Hank Johnson and John Conyers, an amendment exempting regulations designed to protect privacy from the bill's regulatory moratorium. It's a 2-minute vote, and the House will be done voting for this evening, but further work on the bill coming up, lots more amendments to consider. Earlier today, the House voted to approve a bill by Ron Paul calling for an audit of the Federal Reserve. They also passed by a vote of 253 to 170 the Republican bill that would replace the administration's offshore leasing plan. And over in the Senate today passed the Democratic plan for extending the Bush tax cuts to those up to the first $250,000 in income for couples and up to $200,000 for individuals. That passed 51 to 48. The Republican proposal fell in the previous vote by a vote of 45 to 54.
On this vote, the ayes are 159, the nays are 259, less than majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-616. Offered by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Dennis Kucinich's amendment would exempt from the provisions of the bill any significant regulatory action specifically aimed at limiting oil speculation. 2-minute vote. And 2 more amendment votes will follow, and the House will then resume debate on additional amendments to the regulations bill. There was some concern about the bill earlier over a typo, and in fact it caused the Rules Committee to have to meet again late this afternoon. They met, and they decided that they're going to fix the typo from employment and make it unemployment. But that means that the House tomorrow morning will have to take up a new rule for this bill tomorrow morning when they come in, which is 9 o'clock Eastern, so that'll be first out of the chute tomorrow morning. We expect the House also to finish work on the regulations bill. Also, they've added 1 item to their announced schedule for Thursday, and that's a resolution on the shootings last week in Aurora, Colorado.
On this vote, the ayes are 173, the nays are 245, less than the majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. Go ahead. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 4 printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Welch of Vermont.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The Welch-Lipinski amendment would exempt from the regulations bill any regulations designed to increase or promote energy efficiency. One more amendment vote after this.
On this vote, the ayes are 174, the nays are 242, less than the majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 5 printed in Part B of House Report 112-616 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-616, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The last of 5 amendment votes, 20 more amendments to be considered to a bill that would prevent federal agencies from writing or issuing new regulations costing more than $100 million for 2 years, or until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. This is Ed Markey's amendment allowing regulations protecting the public from extreme weather, including drought, flooding, and catastrophic wildfire. On the issue of drought, David Rogers of Politico writes that House Republicans today scrambled to find a path forward before sending lawmakers home in August to face drought-stricken producers just months before the November elections. He writes that House Agriculture Committee Chairman Frank Lucas told Politico that he had instructed his staff to begin talks with their GOP leadership counterparts today on a full-year extension of the current law, the Farm Bill, that is. So the last in this series of votes, 20 more amendments to be considered, and they will finish up work on this bill tomorrow. The House is in tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Eastern.
Vote, the ayes are 177, the nays are 240, less than a majority voting in the affirmative. The amendment is not agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
I move that the committee now rise.
Question is on the motion that the committee do now rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Oh.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 4078 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 741. Resolution providing for further consideration of the bill, H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order at any time to consider House Concurrent Resolution 134 in the House, that the concurrent resolution be considered as read, and that the previous question be considered as ordered on the concurrent resolution and preamble to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question, except 30 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by Representative Kaufman of Colorado and Representative Perlmutter of Colorado or their respective designees.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection. The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
Senate 1335, an act to amend Title 49 United States Code to provide rights for pilots and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 738 and Rule 18, the chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 4078. Will the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, kindly take the chair?
Thank you. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 4078, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, Amendment Number 5, printed in House Report 112-616, offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, had been disposed of. The committee will be in order. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-616, offered by Mr. Watt of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 738, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, after 6 long years of negotiation, thoughtful consideration, and bipartisan cooperation, we passed a patent reform bill which was signed into law on September 16, 2011 by President Obama. At the time the bill was passed, Speaker Boehner said, quote, "Modernizing our patent system for America's innovators and job creators is an important part of the Republican jobs plan. This bipartisan measure reflects our commitment to find common ground with the President on removing barriers to private sector job growth, and I am pleased to see it signed into law. Under the America Invents Act, we, the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, directed the United States Patent and Trademark Office to issue 20 implementing rules. Of the 20 implementing rules, 7 have already been implemented, 9 have been noticed, and 4 are under development. Under this bill that we're considering today, that entire process would be stopped in its tracks. Among the most troubling aspects of stopping the rulemaking process in this case is a rule that would be specifically designed to assist micro-entities in securing patents for their inventions. It's a rule that says, the law says, once the rule is adopted by the Patent and Trademark Office, micro-entities will get a 75% reduction in the filing fees that they have applicable to them. The director of the Patent and Trademark Office has said the new micro-entity provision in America Invents Act makes our patent system more accessible for smaller innovators by entitling them to a 75% discount on patent fees. By paying discounted patent fees as micro-entities, smaller innovators can access the patent system to move their ideas into the marketplace. Although the micro-entity definition became effective September 16 when the President signed the bill into law, the date of enactment of the Patent Reform Bill, the discount is not available to these small entities until these rules are passed. And this bill would make it impossible for us to adopt the rules. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first would like to say I supported the America Invents Act and supported it in committee. And I've got great news for you and great news for me. And that is, I don't see any evidence that the rules to which you referred would total $100 million in impact and meet that threshold. I just don't believe that's the case. And so this amendment is unnecessary. Even if they do meet those thresholds, there are several ways that they could be brought to Congress for approval. The amendment, like so many others offered here tonight, seeks to carve out one set of regulations while leaving all the other regulations under the bill. Surely folks have their favorite regulations that they want to save and defend. And like a number of other carve-out amendments, this one is just not necessary. Titles 1 and 2 of the bill, for example, already exempt regulations, as I indicated, that will not impose $100 million in cost on the economy. Surely the regulations this amendment seeks to protect, those that will streamline patent application processes, will save the economy money, not impose more cost. There is thus no need to worry that they will be affected by these titles of the bill. Meanwhile, Title III of the bill imposes balanced improvements in transparency, public participation, and judicial review for regulatory consent decrees and settlements. It will not prevent the Patent and Trademark Office from settling regulatory suits by consent decree or settlement. For these reasons, I oppose the amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Now, let me get this straight. We have passed a bill on a bipartisan basis, and in order that directs that rules be written, and then we want, when the rules are written, to have it come back to Congress so that we can approve those rules. Tell me, first of all, what sense that makes. Second of all, the gentleman obviously is not aware of some of the corporations that have started off as micro-enterprises if he does not believe that this measures up to his $100 million or whatever the threshold is. Let me read him some of the companies that started off as micro-enterprises. What about Google or Apple or Instagram or Microsoft or Facebook a whole litany of people that were this 75% reduction in fees not in effect might have been discouraged from ever even applying for a patent. So this notion that this doesn't add up to $100 million or whatever this threshold is just false. And the notion that we would tell the administration to adopt a set of rules and then say, okay, we're going to micromanage you and you got to come back over here so we can cross your T's and dot your I's in a non-controversial way like this and delay the process of innovation in our country is just nonsensical. I'd reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired.
While I appreciate the passion of the gentleman from North Carolina, it doesn't change the fact that it's very unlikely that the impact on the economy would be $100 million or more. It's not, that has nothing to do with the sales of the company. It has to do with the impact of the rule or the regulation on the economy. I reserve the balance of my time.
One reserves the balance.
The gentleman from North Carolina's time has expired. The gentleman from Arkansas, he yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I ask for a recorded
Gentleman
vote.
from North Carolina.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, for the proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-616. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-616, offered by Mr. Loebsack of Iowa.
Pursuant to House Resolution 738, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman may proceed.
Madam Speaker, I wish to offer this amendment to provide the opportunity to lower the price of gas and oil. The purpose of my amendment is very simple. It's to ensure that our constituents are not disadvantaged by blindly holding up actions that could potentially lower oil and gas prices. It will allow significant actions to move forward that would lower prices for gasoline, diesel, oil, or other motor fuels. We know that some regulations can be problematic when they aren't crafted carefully with broad input and consideration for effects on the ground. We all know that, and we all agree with that. In fact, I've supported legislation in the past to give small businesses a bigger role in crafting regulations that affect them, and I am a member of the bipartisan Congressional Regulatory Review Caucus. But we also know that there are some regulations that can protect public health, make our economy function more smoothly, and provide opportunity for all Americans to succeed. And as we struggle to recover from the worst recession since the Great Depression, there are families across the country making hard decisions about whether to put food on the table, clothes on their back, or gas in the car. Middle-class folks, we all know, have been hurt disproportionately by higher gas prices, and that's why this amendment, I believe, is so important. I think it would be irresponsible to pass legislation that would actually have the opposite effect, potentially, of its intention in a number of areas, gas prices being one of them. Rural Americans, like those in my home state of Iowa, are more likely to have older vehicles, especially trucks, and farmers and others in rural areas need trucks. That is their mode of transportation. Rural residents also, I think it's unknown to a lot of folks who live in urban areas, on average drive 3,000 miles more per year than their urban counterparts, a disparity particularly evident when considering commutes to work. My amendment will ensure that actions taken that would lower gas, oil, or other motor fuels, the prices of these commodities, can move forward and save money for all Americans and for Iowa families. If there is an action that could lower gas prices, I would think that we can all agree that it should move forward to benefit families and businesses and farmers who are struggling just to make ends meet. If this legislation under consideration were already in effect, no significant actions could have been taken this year to lower oil and gas prices during a time of record costs, and we all had conversations about that on this floor earlier this year. I've pushed for initiatives to utilize more American-produced energy, but as our nation continues to be dependent on foreign sources, American families' cost at the pump continues to be subject to the fluctuations of speculators and manipulation, and we've already heard from some members previously about that issue. I think we need to be focusing our attention on becoming more energy independent through a variety of energy sources. We need an all-of-the-above approach to domestic energy production. There's no doubt about that. And ensuring that actions can move forward that would lower oil or gas prices in the U.S. is part of an all-of-the-above approach where we need to be looking at all options. I truly hope that my colleagues will support what is truly a common-sense amendment, I believe. And I urge my colleagues to ensure that our hands are not tied by this legislation and to take actions to lower gas prices. I think we can improve this bill, and I think this amendment will do that, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What is the purpose for the gentleman from Texas rise?
I rise in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.